and it makes it better for people in terms of being able to heat buildings and control buildings. So getting people to replace all of their boilers is another part of our program. C40 has established a 2-year action plan for becoming more visible and in terms of its promoting environmental sustainability. Our agenda includes C40's organizational capacity and its ability to work with the World Bank and other key international organizations, something which we'll say more about in a few weeks when C40 convenes in Sao Paulo. But Bob Zellick from the World Bank has just been as helpful as anybody can be. Reorganizing its programs into networks of cities so that city officials can learn best practices from each other. We're trying to broaden C40's membership to better reflect not only the world's great cities today, but also those cities that will be great tomorrow, which may pay far more attention to Asian perspective cities in India and China. And to that end, we're already expanding C40 steering committee. This year we're going to include Hong Kong and Jakarta. Now, we're very eager for Chinese cities to play a great role in this work. They clearly face enormous challenges, but I think they've also started to take some great steps to address them. As someone who's had the pleasure of riding the Megalev train in Shanghai, it just shows what you can do with mass transit. And we have to make sure that we find other ways to make mass transit that's affordable and that does not damage our environment, but gets people off the roads and into mass transit. Here in New York City, we are very reliant on automobiles, but they are choking off our economy and they are polluting our air. And one of the things we've done is we've plotted where children who wind up in hospitals suffering from asthma attacks live. And you can see them, they all live right along the main roads. So when you have a main road with a lot of traffic, we pollute the air and the kids suffer. And when you do that, you start getting the parents of those kids a little more interested in the environment. Climate change doesn't mean anything to them. Their child's lives really means an awful lot. During the visit to Hong Kong, I toured a nearby solar industrial park, and evidence of the extraordinary effort that has made China the world's #1 producer of solar power cells and consumer of solar power was evident. At the C40 meeting in Hong Kong, China started to, for the first time, as I said before, to really understand that they have to, at the same time they focus on economic development, focus on the climate that the development is taking place. And as people move into middle class, all of a sudden they have the luxury perhaps of focusing on the air they breathe and the water that they drink. And I think that our nation really can learn a lot from China in this respect and start addressing the issues of economic growth simultaneously with environmental sustainability. I think too often our politicians say, oh, we can't do anything to damage our economic viability. Well, that's true, but at the same time, if we're not alive, I'm not so sure why the economy matters as much as you might think. Your panelists today are going to address all of that. I regret that I am not able to stay, but I do look forward to working with the Committee of 100 on some of these issues. So happy anniversary. You've got a wonderful panel. I know 3 out of the 4. They're smart, and I assume the 4th is as well. I won't tell you which one. I don't know. America and China have an awful lot to learn from each other. They're both countries where people care, where people want to have a future for themselves. They have, I think, an awful lot more in common than things that separate them. And we have a lot to teach and a lot to learn from each other. And I think one of the most important relationships that America has from a trade point of view and a cultural point of view is our relationship with China. And I've always been honored to go and plan to head back as soon as I possibly can. Thank you very much and enjoy the day.
Thank you so much, Mayor Bloomberg. And can I have the slides? All right. I'm Jonathan Rose. I'm going to give a very brief overview of some ideas about what are going on with cities. And then we have an amazing panel. We're going to have a conversation with each of the individual panel members, amongst the panel members, and then with you. All right, so cities are the cauldrons of change throughout the world. This is in Egypt, and we are seeing amazing transformations happening in cities. They're also centers of economic development. They're places that people gather. They're really the places of our greatest markets too. They're affected by several global changes, which are affecting all of our cities. The first is climate change. This is New York City, and the blue is what sea level, if it rises 3 meters and 5 meters, rise, the impact of that on the city. But there are many other impacts that come with climate change that go beyond just sea level rise. Weather patterns are changing dramatically. We saw that Atlanta, which had always been a very humid area, almost ran out of water 2 years ago. New York City is likely to have increased floods, but also we're seeing a deep effect in the developing world. Changing weather patterns, so sub-Saharan Africa is going to have has been having increasingly enormous droughts, and one of the effects of that will be migration. We're seeing increased conflict because of that, so tremendous global shifts. They've said that by 2030 there will be 300 million people perhaps from the developing world who will move into Europe, dramatically changing Europe because of climate change. We're at a state of peak oil. We're probably beyond peak oil now. So the bottom part of the chart are all the places in the world that produce oil, and the top is consumption. And as you heard, particularly you all know in China, that as we grow an increasing middle class, as that middle class urbanizes, there will be an increased demand on oil. Oil is primarily used in the rest of the world as a transportation fuel, and as we drive more cars, we're also going to see that increase. And so that means that mass transit becomes increasingly important, and it means that we're going to enter into a very difficult transition zone. We'll eventually get beyond fossil fuels, but the environmental impacts of fossil fuel, the scarcity that we're likely to see, will be very difficult for us. And remember that in just the last 12 months, we had terrible coal mining disasters, we had terrible deep water drilling disasters, we had a nuclear disaster, we've had fracking. As a matter of fact, 2 days ago, the government released a report that says if you can hold a match next to your water tap and the water gets on fire, it's because of fracking. We shouldn't have conditions like that in America, but so there'll be challenges in creating new energy sources. New York is no longer the global financial capital of the world. It is spreading to many cities around the world. This is a good thing, but it means that money is flowing ever quicker, and sometimes money, and far too often money, is investing in money and not in real assets. This shows trade globally. So each one of these different colors is a continent. So for example, the black is Asia in the middle. So everything from the left is an export, everything on the right is an import. So when China sells something to Japan, that goes left to left on Asia, but you can see the fingers are increasingly intertwining. So globalization, the way our cities are globally interconnected, is deeply important. We are growing a large middle class and an increasing consumer culture around the world. That has serious implications, environmental implications. Consumer goods may drive an economy, but they're not creating investments in infrastructure. But also we have an extraordinary amount of poverty, and there's a bottom billion, and it may be growing to a bottom 2 billion. And these people are living not only in abject poverty, but essentially in lawless states. And it is very likely that we will see the increase in lawless states due to climate change and other impacts throughout the world. And there's a dramatic destabilization that is happening. This barbell of economy is not a good thing for the future of the world. A key to our cities are our great universities, and they are really the ground universities. We call them EDS and MEDS, and health we're going to see as increasingly important industries, not only for the economics of cities, but for the competitiveness of cities. Arts and culture, the ability of people to enjoy life in cities, is extremely important. The connection to nature is extremely important. As people urbanize, there's a reason that people like living in suburban areas, and some of that has to do with contact with nature. So we're seeing our best cities restoring their waterfronts, bringing parks and gardens back, connecting people with nature. Multiple modes of transportation are essential. Infrastructure investments, high-speed rail is critical. The governor during his speech at lunch spoke about cutting spending, but really spending needs to be defined in terms of current spending, but long-term investment. And certainly America needs to focus more on long-term investment. The mayor spoke about megacities, and megacities are important, but actually it turns out not that important. So what we're seeing, I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute, but we're seeing this vast shift in the history, in what's happening in cities.